My daughter-in-law threw my hand-knit baby blanket in the trash, and by midnight, my son was crying so hard on the phone I could barely understand him when he asked, "Mom, what was inside it?" I had spent 4 months making that blanket. 4 quiet months in my little house outside Columbus, Ohio, sitting in Robert's old armchair with a basket of ivory yarn at my feet, and the winter light slipping through the front windows. Every stitch had passed through hands that were slower than they used to be. Hands with swollen knuckles and tiny brown spots that seemed to multiply every year. But they were still my hands. The same hands that had held Michael through ear infections, first day of school nerves, and the night his father died. I made that blanket for my granddaughter Grace, who was still 8 weeks from being born. I chose the softest cotton yarn I could find, not because it was expensive, but because it felt like something a newborn should touch before the world had a chance to become rough. Lauren's baby shower was held on a Saturday afternoon at their new house in a clean, expensive neighborhood where every lawn looked like it had been trimmed with a ruler. The driveway was lined with SUVs. Pale balloons curved around the front door. A sign on the porch said "Welcome Baby Grace" in gold letters. Everything looked perfect from the outside. That was Lauren's gift. She knew how to make things look perfect. I carried my wrapped box in both hands because the blanket felt heavier than yarn. Inside the folded edge, hidden beneath a narrow seam, were 3 things Lauren did not know about. Robert's final letter to our first grandchild. A small silver lily pin that had belonged to my mother. And a sealed envelope from Thomas Bennett, our family attorney, regarding the Whitaker family trust. Robert had asked me to give it when the time felt right. I thought that day might be right. I was wrong. Lauren greeted me at the door wearing a cream dress and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Eleanor, you made it," she said, as if I had arrived from another country instead of 23 minutes away. She looked at the box in my hands and tilted her head. "Oh, something homemade." I smiled. "A blanket for Grace." Her lips pressed together for half a second. "That's sweet," she said, sweet the way some people say expired. Inside, women I barely knew stood around the kitchen island drinking sparkling lemonade from glass dispensers. There were cupcakes with gold flakes, monogrammed cookies, tiny jars of honey as party favors. My gift looked plain among the designer bags and glossy boxes. I placed it on the gift table carefully, smoothing the ribbon once before stepping back. Michael was across the room, laughing with one of Lauren's brothers. When he saw me, he smiled, but he did not come over right away. That was how things had been lately. Love from a distance. Affection postponed until it was convenient. During the gift opening, Lauren held up tiny outfits, expensive bottle warmers, a stroller that probably cost more than my first car. Everyone clapped. When she reached my box, the room grew a little quieter, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it. She peeled back the tissue paper and lifted the blanket with 2 fingers. "Michael's mother made this by hand," she announced, giving the room a bright little laugh. "Isn't that traditional?" A few women smiled politely. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Michael looked at the blanket, then at me. For 1 second I saw the boy he used to be. Then Lauren moved on to the next gift, and the moment disappeared. After the guests left, I realized I had forgotten my purse near the powder room. I went back quietly through the side hallway. That was when I heard Lauren in the kitchen. "I'm not putting that old thing near my baby," she said. Her friend laughed softly. "What if Eleanor asks about it?" Lauren answered without hesitation. "Michael can handle her. He always does." I stopped before the doorway. Through the narrow gap, I saw her pick up the blanket, wrinkle her nose, and drop it into the tall kitchen trash can beside the island. Not place it. Not set it aside. Drop it. The lid swung shut. Michael came in just then. He saw it. He saw the blanket in the trash. He saw his wife's hand still on the lid. And all he said was, "Lauren, please. Not tonight." Waited for more. For my son to open the trash can. For him to say, "That's my mother's gift." For him to remember who taught him to tie his shoes and stayed awake when he had fevers and sold her wedding bracelet to help him through college after Robert's first layoff. But he only rubbed his forehead and looked at the floor. Something inside me became very still. I did not step into the kitchen. I did not ask for the blanket back. I did not make Lauren explain herself in front of anyone. I walked to the powder room, picked up my purse and left through the front door while the gold balloons tapped gently against the porch railing. In my car, I sat with both hands on the steering wheel for nearly 5 minutes. The October air had turned cold, and my breath made a faint fog on the windshield. I could still see that blanket falling. Ivory yarn against black plastic. For months of work. 68 years of memory. Robert's last written words. And my son's silence. Then I drove home. I made tea I did not drink. I hung my coat in the closet. I took the spare copy of the trust papers from Robert's old lockbox and placed them on the kitchen table. At 9:17 p.m. I called Thomas Bennett. I said only one thing. Tom, I believe the condition has been triggered. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Are you sure, Eleanor? I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one Robert used to sit in every morning with his newspaper and black coffee. Yes, I said. I'm sure. 3 hours later my phone rang. Michael's name lit up the screen. When I answered, he was sobbing. Not crying politely. Sobbing like a man who had just discovered the floor beneath his life was not as solid as he thought. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. What was inside it? I closed my eyes. Lauren had thought she threw away yarn. She had no idea she had thrown away the one thing that could have protected her future. For a long moment I did not answer Michael. I listened to him breathe through the phone, uneven and frightened, the way he used to sound when he was 9 years old and had woken from a bad dream. Back then. He would call for me from the hallway, too proud to admit he was scared but too small to stand alone in the dark. I would come to him with a glass of water, sit on the edge of his bed, and smooth his hair until his shoulders stopped shaking. That boy had trusted me with every fear he had. The man on the phone had spent years trusting someone else with everything he did not want to face. Michael, I said quietly. Where is Lauren? There was a pause. I heard a door close somewhere on his end, then his voice dropped. She is upstairs. She says you are overreacting. She says it was just a blanket. I looked down at the trust paper spread across my kitchen table. Robert's signature was there in dark blue ink, firm and careful, written only 6 weeks before he passed. I remembered that afternoon so clearly it felt close enough to touch. Robert had been sitting in the recliner by the window, thinner than he wanted me to notice, with a wool blanket over his knees. Thomas Bennett had placed the documents on a lap desk, and Robert had insisted on reading every page himself. He had always been like that. Patient. Exact. A man who measured twice before cutting once. It is not just money, Eleanor, he had told me after Thomas left. Money without character only feeds the wrong appetite. I had laughed then, softly, because Robert could make even a legal document sound like a Sunday sermon. But he had not laughed. He had reached for my hand and pressed the silver lily pin into my palm. My mother gave this to me when Michael was born. Your mother wore it before that. One day, if we are lucky, there will be a grandchild. I want that child to have something that did not come from a store. That was how the blanket began, years before Grace existed, before Lauren entered our lives, before Michael started asking my permission less and Lauren's approval more. Robert wanted the trust protected, yes, but more than that, he wanted the meaning protected. The money was set aside for Grace's education, health and future housing, enough to change a young life if handled with care. But Robert had seen what greed could do inside families. He had seen cousins stop speaking after funerals. He had watched his own brother turn bitter over property lines and bank accounts. So he wrote conditions. Not cruel ones. Not traps. Just boundaries. The first trustee would remain me unless I chose otherwise. Michael and Lauren could only become co-trustees after receiving Robert's original letter, acknowledging the family conditions, and signing in Thomas Bennett's office that the trust belonged to Grace, not to them. Robert also added one private instruction, meant only for me and Thomas. If I had reason to believe Grace's parents were pressuring me, dismissing me, or treating the family legacy as something to be taken instead of honored, I could freeze the transfer. That sentence had felt unnecessary when he wrote it. Almost dramatic. I remembered teasing him. You think our future daughter-in-law is going to be a villain in a television movie? He smiled, but his eyes were tired. No. I think people show you who they are when they believe there are no consequences. After he died, I put the original letter, the pin, and the attorney's envelope into the blanket because I wanted warmth to carry the weight. I did not want to hand my granddaughter's future across a conference table like a business transaction. I wanted Lauren to unfold something made by hand and understand that family was not measured by price tags. I wanted Michael to see his father's handwriting and remember the kind of man who raised him. I wanted Grace, years later, to know she had been loved before she ever took a breath. That was why I chose ivory yarn. Robert always liked simple things. Our first house had been simple. A small ranch with thin walls, a narrow driveway, and a maple tree that dropped leaves into the gutters every fall. Michael took his first steps in that living room, one hand reaching toward me, the other clutching the edge of a blue blanket my mother had made. That blanket had survived spilled formula, fever nights, road trips to Lake Erie, and one terrible winter when the furnace broke and all three of us slept in the same room under every quilt we owned. I still had it folded in the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Lauren would have called it old. Robert called it proof. Proof that ordinary things could hold a family together when nothing else looked impressive. On the phone, Michael whispered, "Mom, please. Tell me what was in there." His voice pulled me back into the kitchen, into the present, into the cold cup of tea beside my elbow. I could have told him everything right then. I could have poured the truth into his ear and let him carry it upstairs to Lauren like a burning coal. But Thomas had taught me something years ago, and Robert had lived it even better. When emotions are high, speak less. Let paper speak. Let facts stand where feelings might be twisted. So I said, "You need to meet me at Mr. Bennett's office tomorrow morning." "Mom, I need to know now." "No," I said, not sharply, but firmly enough that he went silent. "You needed to know when you watched your wife throw it away." His breathing changed. I knew the words had reached him. I did not enjoy saying them. A mother does not enjoy watching her son see himself clearly for the first time in years. But there are moments when softness becomes another form of lying. And I was finished helping Michael avoid the truth. "Be there at 10 o'clock, I said. "And Michael?" "Yes. Do not let Lauren speak for you." I ended the call before he could promise something he might not keep. Then I gathered the copies of the trust papers into a neat stack, slid them back into the folder, and placed Robert's note on top. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights moving across the kitchen wall and then disappearing. I sat there until the clock on the stove read 12:43. I did not cry. Not because I was not hurt, because hurt had already done its work. Now it was time for the truth to do its own. The next morning came gray and cold, the kind of Ohio morning that made the windows look tired. I woke before my alarm, though I had barely slept. For years, my mornings had followed the same small rituals. Coffee first. Curtains open. A glance at Robert's chair. A quiet good morning to a man who was no longer there but still somehow shaped every room in my house. That morning I did. All of it more slowly. I measured the coffee grounds. I rinsed my cup. I buttoned my navy coat and pinned my hair at the back of my head. I chose pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary, not because I wanted to look elegant, but because I wanted to feel steady. Before leaving, I stood in the hallway beside the cedar chest where Michael's old blue blanket was stored. I placed my hand on the lid for a moment. Then I picked up the folder from the kitchen table and drove downtown. Thomas Bennett's office was on the 4th floor of a brick building near Broad Street, the same building where Robert and I had signed our first wills 22 years earlier. The lobby smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper. I arrived at 9:37. Thomas's receptionist, a woman named Marcy who had known Robert for years, looked up and gave me a sad, careful smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker." "Good morning, Marcy." She glanced at the folder in my hands but did not ask. Good legal secretaries know when silence is part of the job. Thomas opened his office door himself. He was 71 now, tall and narrow, with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. When he saw me, his expression softened. "Eleanor." I handed him the folder. "I brought the copies." He stepped aside. "Come in." His office had not changed much. Same dark wood shelves. Same framed law degree. Same view of traffic moving below like a slow river. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and placed my purse on my lap. Thomas did not rush me. He read the papers though he already knew what they said. He looked at Robert's note last. His jaw tightened slightly. Did Michael witness the disposal? He asked. Yes. Did he attempt to retrieve the item? No. Thomas removed his glasses and set them on the desk. And Lauren knew it was from you? She opened it in front of the guests. Did she know what was inside? No. He nodded once. That may protect her from certain claims, but it does not protect her from the trust condition. I looked out the window. Across the street, a woman in a red coat was waiting at the crosswalk, holding a paper cup. With both hands. Life moved so normally around moments that changed everything. I am not trying to punish her, I said. Thomas leaned back. I know. I just will not let her control something Robert protected for Grace. That is not punishment, Eleanor. That is stewardship. The word settled over me with a strange calm. Stewardship. Not revenge. Not bitterness. A duty. At 9:58, Marcy called through the desk phone and said Michael and Lauren had arrived. Thomas asked for 2 minutes. He opened a drawer and took out a fresh legal pad. Before they come in, I need to ask you one more thing. Are you prepared for Michael to be angry? I almost smiled. Michael has been angry with me before. This is different. No, I said quietly. This is exactly the same. He will be angry because I am forcing him to choose whether he wants peace or truth. Thomas studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. When the door opened, Michael entered first. He looked as if he had aged 5 years overnight. His shirt was wrinkled under his jacket, and his eyes were red. Lauren came in behind him wearing a white blazer, tan heels, and the expression of a woman arriving to correct a misunderstanding caused by lesser people. She looked at me, then at Thomas, then at the papers on the desk. I hope we can clear this up quickly, she said. I have an appointment at noon. Thomas gestured toward the chairs. Please sit. Lauren sat carefully, crossing one ankle over the other. Michael remained standing until I looked at him. Then he sat beside her, but not close enough for their shoulders to touch. I noticed that. Lauren noticed too. Mrs. Whitaker, Thomas began, using my formal name because this was no longer a family conversation, has asked me to review the status of the Whitaker Family Trust as it relates to the expected child, Grace Whitaker. Lauren gave a light laugh. I am sorry, but what does that have to do with a blanket? Michael flinched at the word. Thomas did not. The blanket contained original materials required for a possible trustee transition. Lauren blinked. Original materials? A letter from the late Robert Whitaker, a family heirloom, and a sealed attorney packet. For the first time since she entered the room, Lauren's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her mouth parted slightly, then closed. Michael turned toward her. You told me it was empty. Lauren's voice sharpened. It was a blanket, Michael. How was I supposed to know your mother was hiding legal documents and baby gifts? I folded my hands over my purse. They were not hidden from love. They were protected from carelessness. Lauren's eyes flashed, but Thomas raised one hand gently. Let us stay with the facts. He slid a paper across the desk. Under the trust terms, Mrs. Whitaker remains sole trustee unless, and until she voluntarily transfers limited co-trustee authority. That transfer requires receipt and acknowledgement of the original family letter and attorney packet. Michael stared at the paper without touching it. And now, Thomas's voice stayed even. Now the transfer is suspended. Lauren sat forward. Suspended because of one mistake? I looked at her then. Really looked at her. The polished hair. The perfect nails. The restless impatience underneath the smooth surface. A mistake is putting salt in coffee, I said. A mistake is writing the wrong date on a check. What you did required opening a gift, judging it worthless, carrying it to the trash, and leaving it there. The room went still. Michael closed his eyes. Lauren looked away first. Thomas turned another document toward them. There is more. Lauren's hand tightened around the strap of her purse. Of course there is, she muttered. And in that small, careless sentence, she sounded exactly like the woman I had heard in the kitchen the night before. Thomas turned the next page slowly, not for drama, but because he had always believed important things deserved clean pauses. Lauren shifted in her chair. Michael stared at the edge of the desk as though the polished wood might offer him a different answer. I sat still with my purse on my lap and Robert's note folded beneath my fingers. Before Mr. Whitaker passed, Thomas said. He included a discretionary protection clause. It allows Mrs. Whitaker to withhold trustee transfer, if she has reasonable concern that the child's inheritance may be treated as marital leverage, personal spending money, or a tool to pressure her out of the family. Lauren let out a short breath. That is ridiculous. Thomas looked at her over his glasses. It is legal. You are telling me she gets to decide whether we are good enough parents? Lauren asked. Her voice was higher now, thinner at the edges. No, Thomas said. I am telling you she gets to decide whether she trusts you with the assets Robert Whitaker left under her authority. Michael finally looked up. How much is in the trust? I turned my head toward him, and his face changed before I even spoke. He heard his own question. He heard what it sounded like. A son asking the amount before asking about his father's letter. His eyes dropped. I am sorry, he whispered. Thomas answered anyway. Enough to cover Grace's education, medical needs, and a down payment on a first home if managed responsibly. Lauren's shoulders stiffened. It was almost invisible, but I had spent too many years reading Quiet Rooms not to notice. Money had entered the room, and suddenly the blanket had become real to her. Not meaningful. Real. There is a difference. Thomas placed another sheet on the desk. This is the acknowledgement form that would have been signed after the original letter was received. Michael reached for it with a trembling hand. Lauren touched his wrist. Michael, do not. He looked at her fingers, then slowly moved his hand away from them and picked up the paper. I watched that small movement. It was not loud. It was not final. But it was the first time in a long time I had seen my son choose his own hand. He read the form once. Then again. His throat moved as he swallowed. Dad wrote a letter? Yes, I said. To Grace. Did you read it? No. Robert sealed it himself. His face folded in a way that hurt to see. And now it is gone. Lauren sat back. We do not know that. Maybe the trash company has not processed it yet. They collected from your street at 7:20 this morning, Thomas said. Michael confirmed that with the city service line before arriving. I looked at Michael. He nodded once, ashamed. I went outside at 6, he said. The bins were already empty. The words hung there. Empty. That was the part Lauren had not expected. She had expected anger, maybe guilt, maybe a lecture from an old woman she could later call dramatic. She had not expected consequences that arrived before lunch. I did not know, she said, turning toward Thomas instead of me. That matters. It matters morally, Thomas replied. Legally, the issue is not whether you knew the contents. The issue is whether your action supports Mrs. Whitaker's reasonable concern. Lauren laughed once, but it broke halfway through. So because I threw away one homemade blanket, I am being treated like I am dangerous? I leaned forward slightly. No, Lauren. Because you threw away something from me, the moment you thought no one important was watching. Her eyes snapped to mine. That is unfair. Is it? I asked. My voice stayed calm, almost soft. You opened my gift in front of guests and made it sound like a joke. You carried it into your kitchen. You called it old. You said Michael could handle me because he always does. Then you put it in the trash. Michael turned toward her slowly. You said that. Lauren's face tightened. I was frustrated. People say things. People reveal things, I said. Thomas did not interrupt. He knew the difference between an outburst and a record being made clear. Lauren looked at Michael now, trying to pull him back with the tone I had heard her use many times at family dinners. Sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. Michael, your mother is twisting this. She has never liked me. She has been waiting for a reason to make me look bad. That one almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. For years, Lauren had mistaken my restraint for weakness and my politeness for fear. She thought because I did not fight her over seating charts, holiday schedules, or the way she corrected my recipes, I had no memory. But I remembered everything. I remembered the first Thanksgiving after Robert died, when she told Michael I probably preferred being alone because older people get overwhelmed. I remembered Grace's nursery planning dinner when she spoke for 20 minutes about organic paint and custom furniture. then changed the subject when I offered Robert's old rocking chair. I remembered my 68th birthday, when Michael arrived 2 days late with flowers Lauren had ordered online and a card she had signed for him. None of those things were enough by themselves. That was how women like Lauren worked. Small cuts, clean hands, plausible excuses. But the blanket had gathered all those tiny truths into one visible act. Michael looked at me and I saw confusion fighting with recognition. "Mom," he said quietly, "why did you never tell me?" I let the question sit between us. Outside Thomas's window, a siren passed in the distance, softened by glass and height. "Because every time I tried," I said. "You called it keeping the peace." His face went pale. Lauren opened her mouth, but Thomas spoke first. "At this point, my recommendation is simple. Mrs. Whitaker remains sole trustee. No further documents will be released to either parent without her written approval. Any future educational or medical distributions for Grace will be paid directly to the institution or provider, not to personal accounts." Lauren's composure cracked. Just a little. "You cannot do that." Thomas folded his hands. "We already have." Michael lowered the paper onto his lap. He looked smaller than he had when he entered. Not weak. Stripped down. For the first time there was no wife speaking through him, no performance of unity, no easy escape. Just my son sitting across from me with the cost of his silence laid neatly on legal stationery. I stood. Lauren blinked, surprised. "Where are you going?" I buttoned my coat. "Home." "That is it?" she asked. "You drop this on us and walk away?" I looked at her one last time. "No, Lauren. You dropped it. I only refused to pick it up for you." Then I turned to Michael. "When you are ready to speak as Robert's son and Grace's father, you know where I live." I left the office without raising my voice. In the hallway, Marcy looked up from her desk. She did not ask what happened. She only handed me my gloves. I thanked her, stepped into the elevator, and watched the doors close on my reflection. I looked tired. I looked old. But I did not look defeated. I drove home from Thomas Bennett's office with both hands steady on the wheel, though my chest felt hollow in a way I could not name. Downtown Columbus passed around me in gray pieces. Office windows, crosswalks, coffee shops with people hurrying inside to warm their hands. The world had not paused because my family had cracked open in a lawyer's office. That is one of the cruelest things about private heartbreak. Traffic lights still change. Receipts still print. Strangers still laugh into paper cups. I parked in my driveway just after 11:30 and sat for a moment looking at my house. It was not large. 3 bedrooms, white shutters, a narrow porch. Robert had repainted every other summer until his knees stopped letting him climb ladders. Lauren had once called it quaint, with the same smile she used for nursing home brochures and old casserole dishes. To me, it was the place where Michael learned to ride a bicycle in circles around the maple tree. It was where Robert danced with me in the kitchen the night he found out he was going to retire early. It was where the good dishes sat in the china cabinet, waiting for holidays that became smaller after he died. I carried my purse inside and placed my gloves on the table. The house answered with silence. Not empty silence. Familiar silence. Mine. I made a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, because that was what Robert used to make when days went wrong and neither of us wanted to admit we needed comfort. I ate half. Then I washed the bowl, dried it, and put it away. Small tasks can keep a person from falling apart. 2:15 my phone rang. Michael. I watched his name until the screen went dark. At 2:17 he called again. I let it ring. At 2:21 a text appeared. Mom, please answer. 2:30 another. I am sorry. I need to talk to you without Lauren. I set the phone face down and walked to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The hinges gave their soft little groan when I opened it. Inside were folded quilts, baby clothes, Robert's old flannel shirt, and the blue blanket my mother had made for Michael. I lifted it out with both hands. The edges were frayed. One corner had a faded stain from grape juice. Another had a tiny repair where I had sewn it after Michael dragged it through the backyard during a thunderstorm because he said the blanket was scared of lightning too. I pressed it to my lap and sat on the bed. That was when the first tear came. Not for the lost blanket. Not exactly. For the years I spent teaching my son tenderness, only to watch him become careful instead of kind. Careful around Lauren's moods. Careful around her opinions. Careful around anything that required him to stand between comfort and what was right. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Mom," Michael said. His voice sounded worn down like he had been walking for miles. "Are you alone?" I asked. "I am in my truck." "Then speak." There was a pause. I heard the faint sound of traffic through his speaker. "I went to the landfill office." I closed my eyes. "Michael." "I know. They said it would be almost impossible to find anything specific. They said once the load is processed, there is no way to separate household bags." I still asked. I filled out a request. I do not know why. I just could not sit there. I looked at the blue blanket in my lap. "You are not going to find it." His breath shook. "I know." For a while neither of us spoke. Then he said, "She lied to me, Mom. I did not ask who. She told me you took it home. Then she said maybe one of her friends moved it. Then she said it was my fault for making a big deal out of it. Every time I asked a simple question, the story changed. That is usually how truth announces it is missing," I said. He gave a broken little laugh, but it had no humor in it. "How long has she been doing this?" That question was heavier than all the others. I could have listed every slight, every holiday altered, every invitation delayed until it was too late, every time Lauren spoke over me and Michael pretended not to notice. But pain is not a grocery receipt. You cannot make someone understand by reading every item aloud. "Long enough," I said. He breathed out. "Why did I not see it?" "Because seeing it would have required you to do something." He was quiet. I did not soften the words. "Not this time. I thought keeping Lauren happy was keeping my family together," he said finally. "No," I said. "You were keeping the room quiet. That is not the same thing." I heard him shift in the truck. "When Dad was sick, did he know?" My fingers tightened around the old blanket. Robert had known more than he said. He always did. He had watched Lauren correct my stories at dinner, watched Michael check his wife's face before answering simple questions, watched me fold myself smaller so no one would call me difficult. "He worried," I said. "About Lauren?" "About you." That landed hard. I heard it. A sound left him small and ashamed. "I miss him," he whispered. I looked toward Robert's side of the bed, still made with the plain blue quilt he liked. "So do I." "Mom, I do not know what to do." There it was. The sentence I had been waiting for since he walked into Thomas Bennett's office. Not what should Lauren do. Not what do you want from us. Not how do we fix the money. I do not know what to do. A man standing at the edge of his own choices. "Start with the truth," I said. "Not the version that makes you look better. Not the version that keeps Lauren calm. The truth. The truth is I saw it happen," he said, his voice low. "I saw her throw it away. I knew it was cruel. I knew you would be hurt. And I still did nothing." The house seemed to go very still around me. Outside my bedroom window, a few dry leaves moved across the grass. "That is the first honest thing you have said today," I told him. He cried then, quietly. I let him. A mother learns the difference between tears that ask to be rescued and tears that finally understand. These were the second kind. When he could speak again, he said, "Can I come over?" I looked at the clock. 3:46. "Not today." The answer surprised him. Surprised me a little too. "Mom, please." "No, Michael. Today you need to go home and decide whether you are Grace's father first or Lauren's shield first. You cannot be both." He did not argue. That told me something. "Tomorrow," I said. "Come at 10. Alone." After we hung up, I folded Michael's blue blanket and placed it back in the cedar chest. Then I went to the kitchen, took out my knitting basket, and touched the empty space where the ivory yarn had been. For the first time since the baby shower, I felt the shape of what had been lost. Not just a blanket. A test. Lauren had failed it loudly. Michael had failed it quietly. And now at last, one of them had begun to notice. Michael arrived the next morning at 9:58, which told me he had been sitting somewhere nearby, waiting until it was almost exactly 10. I saw his truck pull up through the lace curtain in the living room. For a moment I did not move. He sat behind the wheel with both hands resting on it, staring at my front porch like a man trying to remember how to enter a place he used to belong to without knocking. When he was little, he never used the front door. He came through the kitchen, dropping his backpack on a chair, opening the refrigerator before saying hello. Now he stepped out slowly, wearing the same wrinkled jacket from the day before, carrying nothing but his phone and a folded envelope. I opened the door before he rang the bell. He looked tired. Not sleepy. Tired in the deeper way, the way people look when excuses stop working. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Good morning, Michael." I stepped aside. He walked in and paused near the entry table where Robert's photograph stood in a silver frame. It was from our 40th anniversary, taken at a small Italian restaurant in German Village. Robert had one arm around me and the other hand raised slightly, as if someone had caught him mid-story. Michael looked at the photo for a long time. "I forgot how much he smiled," he said. "He smiled when he meant it." Michael nodded. The words found their place. I led him to the kitchen. I had made coffee but no breakfast. Comfort has its limits when truth is still hungry. He sat at the same table where he used to do math homework, where Robert had taught him to balance a checkbook, where Lauren had once sat scrolling on her phone while I packed leftovers for them after Sunday dinner. I poured him coffee in the blue mug he used whenever he came home from college. His hand closed around it, and for a second he looked embarrassed by the memory. "Lauren wanted to come," he said. I sat across from him. I assumed she did. I told her no. I said nothing. He needed to hear the silence after that sentence. He needed to understand it was not a medal. It was a beginning. He placed the folded envelope on the table. "She wrote you a note." I did not touch it. "Did she ask you to bring it?" "Yes." "Did you read it?" "Yes." "What does it say?" He looked down into his coffee. "That she is sorry if you were hurt. That she did not understand the importance of the blanket. That stress from the pregnancy made her emotional. That she hopes we can move forward as a family." I looked at the envelope. Cream paper. Lauren liked cream paper. It photographed well. "That is not an apology," I said. "I know." His answer came quickly and that mattered. He slid the envelope back toward himself. "I should not have brought it." "No," I said. "You should not have." His face tightened, but he accepted it. The old Michael would have defended her reflexively. The man in my kitchen only folded the envelope again and put it in his jacket pocket. "I spent last night in the guest room," he said. "She said I was punishing her. She said you are turning me against my wife." "Am I?" He shook his head slowly. "No. You are making me look at what I already saw." I wrapped both hands around my cup. The coffee had gone lukewarm. "That is harder to forgive." "I know." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right." Was Dad's trust really about Grace, or was it about Lauren? I sat back. There it was. The question beneath all the paperwork. "It was about character," I said. "Lauren is part of that now. So are you." He flinched slightly. "Good. Truth should not always pass through a person without touching anything. Your father did not know Lauren well when he wrote those conditions," I continued. "But he knew families. He knew grief. He knew. Money can make people polite until they think they are close enough to take." Michael stared at the table. "I thought he trusted me." "He did." "Then why not just leave it to me?" "Because trusting you did not mean ignoring your weaknesses." His eyes lifted. That one hurt. I could see it. But he did not leave. "What weakness?" he asked, though his voice told me he already knew. "You confuse being loved with being approved of," I said. "You have since you were young. If someone is displeased with you, you panic. You fix. You smooth things over. It made you a sweet child. It makes you an easy man to steer." His jaw tightened. Not anger. Recognition fighting pride. "Lauren says I am loyal. Loyalty without judgment is just obedience with better manners." He looked toward the window. A squirrel moved along the fence outside, quick and nervous. For a while, we listened to the refrigerator hum and the faint sound of a delivery truck somewhere down the block. Then he took out his phone and opened a message thread. "I found these last night," he said, turning the screen toward me. Messages between Lauren and her friend. I did not take the phone. Read only what you think I need to hear. His thumb moved once. She said the trust was probably bigger than you admitted. She said once Grace was born, we could pressure you because you would do anything to stay close to the baby. My fingers went still around the cup. Michael's voice grew rough. Her friend asked what if you refused. Lauren wrote, then Michael handles his mother. He always does. The kitchen did not change. The light stayed where it was. The clock ticked. But something old inside me closed like a door. Not loudly. Completely. I am sorry, Michael said. I looked at him. For what? He opened his mouth then stopped. That was the first test. An easy sorry is often just a wet blanket thrown over a fire. I waited. He looked down at his hands. For letting her believe that was true. For making it true. For using your love for me as something I could spend whenever I needed peace at home. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice even. That is closer. Tears filled his eyes, but he did not ask me to comfort him. Another beginning. What happens now? He asked. I stood and opened the drawer beside the stove. Inside was a new skein of ivory yarn, still wrapped in paper from the craft store. I placed it on the table between us. Now I make another blanket for Grace. He stared at it. After everything? Grace did not throw the first one away. His face broke a little. Can I help? I almost said no. The word rose easily. But then I imagined Robert in his chair, watching his son at the table, waiting to see whether repair could begin with something smaller than pride. I pushed the yarn gently toward Michael. You can wind this into a ball, I said. Slowly. If you pull too hard, it tangles. He nodded, wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, and picked up the skein like it was something fragile. For the next 20 minutes we sat in my kitchen without speaking much. I held the yarn loose between my hands while he wound it carefully, turn by turn. He made mistakes. Twice the strand caught and knotted. Each time he stopped instead of yanking. Each time I showed him how to loosen it. That was how the morning passed. Not forgiven. Not fixed. But no longer hidden. By the time Michael left, the ball of ivory yarn sat in the center of my kitchen table, uneven but whole. He had wound it too tightly in some places and too loosely in others. A strand crossed where it should have circled cleanly. I did not correct it. Some repairs carry the shape of the hands that made them. He stood at the back door with his coat over one arm, looking younger than 41 and older than I remembered. I am going to talk to Lauren tonight, he said. I rinsed our coffee cups at the sink. Talk or explain? He paused. What is the difference? Explaining is what you do when you are hoping someone will give you permission to keep avoiding the truth. He looked down. Then talk. I dried my hands on a dish towel and turned to him. Do not go home trying to win an argument. Go home listening for honesty. There may not be any. He nodded, but I could see the sentence frightened him. I did not blame him. It is one thing to discover a person has been unkind to your mother. It is another to wonder whether unkindness has been living beside you, pouring coffee in your kitchen, folding baby clothes in the nursery, smiling in photographs you once thought were happy. After he left, I sat at the table and picked up the yarn. My fingers remembered what my heart did not yet feel ready to do. Loop. Pull through. Settle. Again. The beginning of a blanket always looks like almost nothing. A thin row of stitches, fragile and unimpressive. But if you keep going, if you do not pull too hard, if you do not pretend a knot is not there, something useful begins to form. Around 6 that evening, Thomas Bennett called. His voice was measured, but I knew him well enough to hear concern beneath the formality. Lauren's attorney contacted my office. I set my knitting down. Already. What does she want? At this point, information. She claims you concealed financial documents inside a gift, creating an unreasonable expectation that she would preserve unknown legal materials. I looked toward Robert's photograph on the mantel. For a second I could almost hear him sigh. That sounds like Lauren. It sounds like an attorney trying to build a frame before facts harden, Thomas said. Do not worry. The trust is secure. But I need you to gather anything that demonstrates pattern, context, or prior concern. Messages. Messages, emails, notes, anything showing pressure about money, access to Grace, or your role in the family. I let out a slow breath. I have some. I thought you might. He did not say it unkindly. People think quiet women keep nothing. They are wrong. Quiet women keep Christmas cards with the wrong names written inside. They keep text messages that arrive 2 hours before dinner saying plans changed, then see photographs online proving plans had not changed at all. They keep voicemails where sweetness is laid over contempt like frosting over stale cake. I had never collected those things for revenge. I collected them because when someone keeps telling you a cut is imaginary, you sometimes need proof that you are bleeding. After we hung up, I opened the drawer beneath the hall table. Inside was a folder labeled household receipts because that was the kind of label no one ever opened. Beneath appliance warranties and old property tax statements were printed messages. Not many. Enough. Lauren asking Michael whether I had finally agreed to simplify my living situation. Lauren telling him, "Your mother does not need that whole house forever." Lauren writing, "Once the baby comes, she will behave if she wants access." That last one I had printed 3 months earlier, after Michael accidentally forwarded me a message meant for Lauren. He apologized then, said it was taken out of context. I had said nothing. I added it to the folder. I carried the papers to the kitchen and spread them beside the yarn. The table looked strange with both things on it. Softness and evidence. Love and record. Around 7:40, my phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "She says I betrayed her by going to your house." I read it twice. Then another message came. "She says the trust belongs to us because we are Grace's parents." Then a third. "She says you are using money to control our child." I did not answer immediately. I stood and filled the kettle. I waited for the water to heat. There are moments when a mother wants to rush in and rescue her child from pain, even when the child is grown and the pain is overdue. But if I kept translating Lauren for him, he would never learn her language himself. Finally, I wrote back, ask her what she believes belongs to Grace. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, appeared again. 10 minutes passed. Then Michael sent one sentence. "She said Grace will not know the difference." I sat down slowly. That was the clearest thing Lauren had ever said. Not because it was loud, because it was naked. Grace will not know the difference. A baby would not know whether a blanket was handmade or bought online. A child would not know whether her great-grandmother's pin had been thrown away or saved. A young woman might not know whether her first tuition check came from love or from control. Lauren was counting on ignorance. Robert had counted on legacy. At 8:23 there was a knock at my front door. Not Michael's knock. Too sharp. Too certain. I looked through the peephole and saw Lauren standing on the porch in a beige coat, one hand resting on the curve of her pregnant stomach, the other holding her phone. Porch light made her face look pale and polished. I opened the door but kept one hand on the frame. "Eleanor," she said, with a smile that belonged at church luncheons and bank meetings, "we need to talk." "No," I said. Her smile faltered. "Excuse me. We do not need to talk. You need something. That is different." Her eyes hardened so quickly that I knew the smile had cost her effort. "You are making this ugly." I looked past her at the quiet street, the trimmed lawns, the maple leaves gathered along the curb. "No, Lauren. I am letting it become visible." She glanced toward my living room window, perhaps imagining the papers on my table, perhaps wondering how much I had kept. "You think you have won because you have a lawyer," she said softly. "I think I have boundaries because I finally chose to use them." Her hand tightened around her phone. "Michael will come home. Probably. He will choose his family." I nodded. "I hope he does." She did not understand at first. Then she did, and the look on her face told me she hated the meaning. I closed the door before she could answer. Not loudly, just firmly. Then I returned to the kitchen, picked up my knitting, and began the second row. The next morning I delivered the folder to Thomas Bennett myself. I did not email it. I did not trust digital convenience with something that had taken years to become clear. The sky was pale, and the sidewalks downtown still held small damp patches from overnight rain. I wore my gray wool coat and carried the folder in a plain canvas tote, the same tote Lauren had once called very practical, in a tone that made practical sound like poor. Marcy buzzed me in without making me wait. Thomas was already standing behind his desk when I entered. His sleeves rolled once at the cuffs, 3 yellow legal pads stacked beside his coffee. "You found quite a bit," he said after opening the folder. "I kept what I thought I might one day need to understand." He looked up. "That is not the same as keeping score." "No," I said. "It is not." He read the messages in silence. The one about my house. The one about behaving if I wanted access to Grace. The one where Lauren wrote that a baby would not know the difference. His face did not change much, but when he finished, he removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. "This helps." "Will it hurt Michael?" I asked. Thomas leaned back. "The truth may hurt him. The documents protect him." That was the kind of answer Robert would have liked. Clean. Uncomfortable. Necessary. By noon, Lauren's attorney had requested a formal meeting. By 3, Michael called me from his truck and said Lauren had gone from angry to sweet to silent within the same hour. "She keeps saying we need to present a united front," he told me. "Against whom?" I asked. He did not answer right away. "That is what I asked her." "And?" She said against interference. I looked at the half-finished second blanket resting beside me on the couch. The rows were longer now, soft ivory folding over my knees. "Michael, a united front is meant to protect a child, not protect a lie." He exhaled. "I know." The formal meeting happened 2 days later in Thomas's conference room. This time Lauren did not wear white. She wore dark green, her hair pulled back, her face composed in the careful way people look when they have practiced in a mirror. Her attorney was a younger man named Preston Hale, with a silver watch and a leather portfolio that looked barely used. Michael arrived separately. I noticed that before anyone said a word. He sat beside Lauren because the chairs had been arranged that way, but he placed his hands on the table in front of himself, not near hers. Thomas began with the trust documents. Preston tried to frame the lost packet as an unfortunate misunderstanding, an emotional family matter, a regrettable disposal of an item whose contents were unknown. Thomas let him speak. That was Thomas's way. He allowed careless arguments enough rope to show their own shape. Then he placed Lauren's messages on the table, one by one. Not all of them. Only the ones that mattered. Lauren's face stayed still through the first 2. At the third, her eyes moved to Michael. He was reading the paper as if each word had been typed by a stranger, and yet somehow written in a language he finally understood. Preston cleared his throat. Private marital communications should not be taken out of context. Thomas folded his hands. These were voluntarily shared with Michael, and in one instance accidentally sent to Mrs. Whitaker. "We are not in court. We are establishing trustee risk." "There is no risk," Lauren said too quickly. Thomas turned to her. "Then you will have no objection to all trust disbursements being made directly to verified institutions, with Mrs. Whitaker remaining sole trustee until Grace reaches 25. Lauren's mouth tightened. "That is excessive." "It is protective," I said. She looked at me then, and for once there was no pretty layer over the resentment. "You are enjoying this." I considered that. The room waited. "No," I said. "I enjoyed knitting the first blanket. I enjoyed imagining Grace wrapped in it. I enjoyed believing my son had built a home where love would be recognized, even when it did not arrive in a gift bag from an expensive store. This part, Lauren, I do not enjoy. I simply refuse to be ashamed of doing it." Michael lowered his head. Lauren looked away. Preston shifted in his chair. Thomas slid the final document forward. "Mrs. Whitaker has also chosen to add a visitation protection request to her estate plan. It does not force access. It does, however, document her long-standing relationship to the child, and her intent that financial support not be used as leverage to isolate Grace from extended family." Lauren gave a small laugh. "Grace is not even born yet." "Exactly," Thomas said. "So we are beginning with clarity." Michael finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room because it was his own. "I agree to the direct disbursements." Lauren turned toward him. "Michael." He did not look at her. "I agree to Mom remaining trustee." "You cannot just decide that." "I am not deciding," he said. "Dad already did. I am just done fighting the part of him that was right." The silence after that was different from all the others. It had weight but also shape. Lauren sat back as if the chair had moved beneath her. Preston closed his portfolio halfway, then opened it again because there was nothing useful to say. Thomas wrote a note on his pad. I looked at my son and did not feel victory. I felt grief. Grief for how long it had taken. Grief for what had been lost in a trash bin before anyone had the courage to call it wrong. When the meeting ended, Lauren walked out first, her heels clicking down the hall with controlled speed. Preston followed. Michael remained in his chair. Mom, he said, I should have chosen better sooner. I stood and buttoned my coat. Yes, I said. He nodded, accepting the full sentence without asking me to soften it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street shone under a thin strip of afternoon sun. Michael walked me to my car, but he did not try to hug me. That too told me he was learning. At my door, he said, Grace is due in 7 weeks. I know. When she comes, I want you there. I looked at him over the roof of my car. Wanting me there is not enough anymore. His eyes filled, but he stayed steady. Then I will make sure there is room for you. I opened the car door. Do that for Grace first. Then we will see what it means for me. I drove home with the tote bag empty beside me and the new blanket waiting on my couch. That evening I knitted 4 more rows. Loop. Pull through. Settle. Again. The pattern was simple. The work was not. Grace was born 6 weeks and 4 days after the second meeting at Thomas Bennett's office, on a Tuesday morning while rain tapped softly against the hospital windows in Columbus. Michael called me at 5:28 before sunrise. His voice was quiet, tired and different. Not frantic. Not helpless. Just full. Mom, he said, she is here. I sat up in bed with one hand pressed against my chest. For a moment I could not speak. I had imagined that call for months, but imagination is a thin thing compared to the sound of your son becoming a father. Is she all right? I asked. She is perfect, he whispered. Then after a pause, Lauren is resting. There was no invitation in that first call. I heard its absence, and I did not reach for what had not been offered. I am glad they are both safe, I said. Give Grace my love. He was quiet. I will call you later. After we hung up, I made coffee and sat beside the finished blanket. It lay folded on the arm of Robert's chair, ivory and soft, with Grace Whitaker stitched in small silver letters along one corner. There was nothing hidden inside it. No attorney packet. No heirloom. No final test. Only threat time and a grandmother's hands. At 9, Thomas sent a brief message. Congratulations, Eleanor. Robert would be smiling today. I read it twice, then placed the phone face down. I did not cry until I touched the silver embroidery. 2 days passed before Michael came to my house. I saw his truck pull into the driveway just before noon. The sky had cleared, leaving the street bright and cold. He stepped out carefully, opened the back door, and lifted a small car seat as if it contained something more delicate than breath. Lauren was not with him. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the frame, feeling every one of my 68 years and every mile that had brought us to that porch. Michael looked up at me. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. May we come in? He asked. Not can we. May we? That small courtesy carried more repair than a dozen rushed apologies. I stepped aside. He brought Grace into the living room and set the car seat near Robert's chair. For a while, neither of us moved. She was tiny, wrapped in a hospital blanket with a pink cap pulled low over her forehead. Her mouth made the smallest shape, like she was considering the world and had not yet decided whether to trust it. Michael unbuckled her slowly. His hands trembled a little, but he did not rush. Then he placed her in my arms. Hi, Grace, I whispered. Her weight was almost nothing. 6 pounds 8 ounces, Michael told me. But in my arms she felt like history. She felt like Robert's hand over mine in the attorney's office. Like my mother's silver pin. Like a blue blanket dragged through wet grass by a little boy who believed even fabric could be afraid of storms. Michael sat on the edge of the couch and watched me hold his daughter. His eyes filled, but he did not look away. I told Lauren I was bringing her here, he said. I kept my gaze on Grace. And she said it was too soon. For whom? He exhaled. That is what I asked. Grace shifted, one tiny hand escaping her sleeve. I touched her fingers with the tip of mine. What did Lauren say? She said you would use this against her. I looked at him then. Use a baby? I know, he said quickly. I heard it this time. That mattered. Not because it solved everything. Because truth heard once can still be denied. Truth heard twice begins to become responsibility. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. The landfill called yesterday, he said. They did not find the blanket. But I went through some things in the garage after Lauren came home. I found this in a box of decorations she had moved from the shower. He handed me the pouch. Inside was the silver lily pin. For a second the room blurred. It must have slipped out before she threw the rest away, he said. My fingers closed around it. The pin was duller than I remembered but whole. Not everything had been saved. Not everything had been lost. I pinned it gently to the corner of the new blanket, not through the baby's clothing, just through the folded edge resting over my lap. Michael watched in silence. Dad would have liked that, he said. Yes, I said. He would have. We sat that way for nearly an hour. Michael told me Lauren was staying with her mother for a few days. Not as a punishment. A space. He had begun individual counseling through his employee assistance program. He had opened a separate savings account for Grace's everyday expenses. He had told Lauren that the trust would not be discussed at home as if it were theirs. He said these things plainly without asking for praise. I appreciated that. A grown man does not deserve a parade for finally standing upright, but he does deserve to keep walking. When Grace began to fuss, I rocked her in Robert's chair. The motion came back to me without effort. Forward, back, forward, back. Michael stood by the mantel, looking at his father's photograph. I keep thinking about what you said, he murmured. About keeping the room quiet not being the same as keeping the family together. I looked down at Grace. Her eyes were closed now, one cheek resting against the blanket I had made after the first one was lost. Quiet can hide a crack for a long time, I said. But it cannot hold a house up. He nodded. Before he left, he asked if he could bring Grace again next Sunday. I told him yes if he came with honesty and not just guilt. He accepted that too. At the door he stopped. Mom. Yes. I am sorry for what I threw away before Lauren ever touched that blanket. That was the apology I had not known I was waiting for. I looked at him, my son, Grace's father, Robert's boy, still unfinished but finally awake. Then do not throw away the rest, I said. After they left, the house returned to silence, but it did not feel hollow. On Robert's chair lay the new blanket, warm from Grace's small body, with the silver lily pin catching a thin line of afternoon sun. Lauren had thrown away what she could not price. She had mistaken handmade for worthless, patience for weakness, and silence for surrender. But love is not made valuable by being recognized. Legacy does not disappear because someone fails to honor it. And dignity, once reclaimed, does not need to shout to be heard.